Thank you. Dan, you are live.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the January 27th Special Meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Ms. Schmidt, will you please call roll?
Yes, thank you. Chairperson Boyle, or I'm sorry, Chairperson Bowman.
No.
I tried.
Chairperson Bowman is present remotely from his home in East Lansing.
Vice Chair Boyle.
Kathleen Boyle, present remotely from East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Member Sullivan.
Joseph Sullivan, attending remotely from my home in East Lansing, Michigan.
Member Williams.
Hello, everyone. I am present this evening, attending remotely from my home in East Lansing.
Member Wolf.
Here, attending remotely from East Lansing.
Member Wagner.
I'm here attending remotely from my house in East Lansing.
Member Lapini.
Everyone, this is Lauren Lapine, attending remotely from my home in East Lansing.
And Member Cahill.
Member Cahill here from his home in East Lansing.
All members present.
Thank you, and thank you for clarifying the pronunciation of Member Lapine's last name. It's been a year now, and I've been saying it incorrectly every time you've raised your hand. I will endeavor to do better.
Totally fine.
Let's see. Once again, I'll thank everybody that's in attendance for their patience as we deal with this not so new technology. All members of the public will have an opportunity to address the commission during public comment and during each public hearing. Each commission member will be called upon individually to speak during an item. If a commission member may say pass if they do not have a comment for that item. Commission members are reminded to state their name before speaking or making a motion. And all votes of consequence will be taken by a roll call vote. That said, that will move us on to item 1.2, approval of the agenda. There's an agenda in your packet. I would move approval of the agenda as presented.
Kathleen Boyle, second.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first.
Kathleen Boyle, second.
Yes, but I didn't hear an initial motion.
I thought yours was the motion to accept.
Well, I'm entertaining the motion, excuse me.
Then I will so move.
Thank you.
I'll second. Yeah.
Thank you, folks. That's been moved by Vice Chair Boyle and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, that motion carries. And we do not have our minutes for our most recent meeting, so we'll move us on to item 2, committee reports. I do not believe we have any, unless there are some ad hoc committees that wish to speak up. Item 3, staff reports. Ms. Schmidt.
There are no staff reports at this time.
All right. And item 4, commissioner announcements. I'm not seeing anybody eager to say anything. So that'll move us on to item 5, communications from citizens. This is the time in our meeting when we invite members of the public to come forward and make any comments on items that are or may not be on our agenda. I'm checking. It looks like we have a couple of attendees here this evening. Each caller in our queue will have 5 minutes to address the commission. At the end of 5 minutes, they will be placed back on mute. Callers will be identified by the last 3 digits of their phone number. When called upon, you will be unmuted. If you do not wish to speak, please indicate so by saying pass. If you do choose to speak, please clearly state your name and address before addressing the commission. This is not a requirement, but it does help our clerk in keeping accurate minutes of our meetings. Ms. Urdialis, are you?
Yes.
Manning, thank you.
The first person I have in the queue is with the phone number 963. You're allowed to talk.
Though you're currently muted. There, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Hi, this is Alice Streiger. My questions are about the form-based code because I've been thinking about this, and so I thought I'd share some questions that I think are some global questions worth asking. First, the Shaping the Avenue Code pays attention to design, I'm wondering about the potential economic lift or economic depression this plan is likely to result in terms of reinvestment in real estate in the affected area. I wonder this particularly in light of what happened with the East Village, where landlords found themselves unable to do basic upgrades for years because they counted as non-conforming. But then ultimately what got built was the hub, which has turned out to be a cash cow in terms of property taxes. But that only got built after the code was amended specifically to allow that project. I realize the code you're considering is very different from the East Village code, but what do we know about how this code might help, boost, or hurt, prevent increases in revenues to the taxing jurisdictions, including East Lansing, ELPS, Ingham County, et cetera? Second, if we don't know anything yet about that, what economic analysis is going to be done before council is asked to consider adopting it? The economic impact of the decision on this strikes me as being at least as important as the design itself, because this is actually the most economically dense area of the city in terms of revenue for the city. Third, one often mentioned idea behind form-based code is the idea of trading developers the pain of a pretty strict design code for the benefit of being relatively agnostic when it comes to use. From what I've followed so far, it sounds like there may be possibly that certain uses will be restricted or forbidden. For example, apartments with more than 3 bedrooms will still be not allowed. Residential on the ground floor, I think the idea is not to allow it. Issues with regard to parking, et cetera. In what ways is the current draft of this document use agnostic compared to our existing code? And if it is not use agnostic, would it make more sense not to call this a form-based code, but talk about it as a zoning code that prescribes and proscribes uses as well as design? Fourth, one motivation for the Shaping the Avenue work was that MEDC was wanting to see us become a redevelopment-ready city, so that developers would find redevelopment here easier, faster, and less expensive. Because City of East Lansing satisfying MEDC on this might free up resources for the city. Is what's being done produced what the MEDC wants to see? In other words, has MEDC weighed in on this to say this is going in the direction they want or they don't want, so that we can make sure we're on track for the added state resources? Fifth, can you point us to examples of cities like East Lansing where there is a densely constructed, highly occupied, low vacancy downtown where a form-based code like this resulted in redevelopment that made a real difference in terms of the lived experience and the economic lift? I ask this because one thing I hear all the time from developers is that one reason East Lansing's downtown properties do not redevelop very often is that the properties are generating really good incomes. So the incentive for the property owners to redevelop is very low. It seems like most successful form-based codes happen in places where there is either vacant land or vacant buildings, where the benefits of redevelopment are significant. So it's worth it to the owners to do redevelopment under a form-based code. I'm struggling as I look around to find an example of a city like ours where this has been implemented beyond a small pilot project for a specific small area, and that worries me. Innovation this big in this important an area economically to this city is a big risk if we're the first people really trying this. And finally, sixth, if it turns out that this drafted code isn't the right way to go, what can we use from this experience to improve our existing code and to improve our existing processes to get better redesign and to encourage property reinvestment that benefits the public coffers? It seems like the team that's worked on this has learned a lot, and I'm hoping that we can use their learning to improve what we already have if it turns out we're not passing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just by way of explanation, Dr. Drager, that your comments were added to our packet late this afternoon. And I've made notes of all the points that you've brought up. And if we don't get to talk about them this evening, since we've got a fairly full agenda regarding the Avenue Forum District, we'll certainly get to them at a future meeting.
Thank you.
So thanks for the input.
Thank you.
Ms. Ordelis. Yep.
Next in the queue is the caller with the initials AA. You are now allowed to talk.
I'm here for new business 8.1. Thank you.
Thank you. That is it, Dan. There's no other attendees.
Thank you. That we will then close this portion of our meeting that is regarding the public hearing and move us on into item 7.1, our only item of old business. this evening. This is a consideration of a site plan application for 270 West Grand River Boulevard for the property at 270 West Grand River Avenue to demolish the existing structures and develop a parking lot. Ms. Schmidt.
Yes, this particular applicant was asked to provide some new information from the last meeting. They were unable to get it completed before this meeting, so they're asking to be postponed to the February.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just turning my ringer off. So do you need a formal motion to move to, so that we'll see this at our next meeting?
Yes, you'll need to make a motion to defer it to the February 10th meeting.
Okay.
Commissioner Cahill, I move to defer this matter to our next meeting.
Commissioner Williams, support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Williams to move this item to our next meeting, which is scheduled for February 10th. Is there any discussion on that motion? I think we can have a roll call. I don't see any hands, so I think we can have a roll call vote on this matter. All those in favor of postponing this item until February 10th, please signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. That'll move us on to item 8.1, our item of new business. This is a site plan and special use permit extension for the property at 2040 Merritt Road to construct 3 new buildings, including a 7,000 square foot medical marijuana provisioning center, 4-story, 107-room hotel, and 8,690 square foot retail strip center, including a drive-through. Ms. Schmidt.
Thank you. This applicant had requested a 6-month extension previously and is allowed to do up to a year. So they are asking for another 6-month extension for their site plan so that they can provide the building permits needed to start the project.
Any questions for Ms. Schmidt? This will come back as an item of new business when it comes back again. Ms. Schmidt, just.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Just assuring that this right now, it's an item of new business, that it'll come back as an item of new business in presumably July or before that.
No, this has already been approved and they're just asking for an extension, a 6-month extension.
I'm just trying to accommodate potential public hearing, either now or at that time or both.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding what you're saying.
So I mean, I guess it's because it's not really a public hearing, it's new business, but it's
Correct.
effectively going to come before us once again. If there's a need for the public to want to comment on it, in as much as they've already had that opportunity, if there's going to be significant changes or if there's going to be something that's going to, then we should just presume to have a public hearing at that time or open.
Right, there aren't any changes proposed at this time. So they're just asking for the extension for the building permits.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, well, I don't know, maybe I'll go ahead with this. I guess we're going to hear from the applicant, but I think there's a technical problem with this. We need to approve it, so I'm not going to argue with that. But I looked at the code on this, and the relevant part of our ordinance says, upon written application filed prior to the termination of the 12-month period, that's the first 12 months of the special use permit, the Planning Commission may authorize one extension of the time limit for a further period of 12 months without the necessity of holding another public hearing thereon. And that's the only statement in our code that allows what we're doing tonight. So I think our first extension was wrong. We should have done it for 12 months. It doesn't say for up to 12 months, or it says an extension of 12 months. And doing another one now would technically be wrong as well because it only allows one. So there's no reason, we should go ahead and do this, but I think in the future we should stick to what it says in the code, one extension of 12 months.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Schmidt or any other comments? All right, then a motion would be in order.
Are we going to hear from the applicant?
Oh, I'm sorry. If I don't see any reason why not, he is here. Ms. Urdialis, we let Mr. Andre in?
I'm in, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Sure.
As Ms. Schmidt had stated, we are asking for that extension. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Wolf, and I kind of agree with you on the interpretation, but we are asking for that extension in order to get our building permits. I just want to give you a quick update of where we're at on the project. The project has been submitted for a building permit. It is with the city. It's over at the building department, currently under review. We've paid our fees and we're in the queue. Also, we have received the tap connection permit with the drain office as well, with the drain commission. And we've also submitted in for the final permit. There was one last item and we had to pay a fee at the road department. So we're at the final stages. We have also been through city engineering as well. The soil erosion permit is ready. We have the fees. I just spoke with Tim this week, and we're just waiting to, or I'm sorry, Jack this week, and we're just ready to pull that permit. So everything's kind of queued up. We have our state permit for extension of public sanitary. Everything is right there. We just need that little bit of time for the building permit to come in. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant? I'm seeing no hands, so a motion would be in order. Commissioner Sullivan?
Hang on, before that, I think Commissioner Wolf brings up a good point. And as a point of order, it might make sense to, instead of passing an additional 6-month extension, to retroactively modify the previous extension. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it might be a better option.
It does make sense, but I'm removed from my Robert's Rules of Order cheat sheet at the moment. I presume that motions can be revisited if they're brought up by the prevailing side, but I'm as comfortable with just proceeding as is. Commissioner Wolf, thank you.
Yeah, I think by Robert's rules, it's too late to reconsider this. You have to do it, I think, before it's recorded in the minutes of, or before the minutes of that meeting are approved, something like that.
Certainly possible.
So I think that motion is gone and done. And
I think as long as we acknowledge that there's an error here, that seems to me to be sufficient, given that I suppose if it were a matter of we were denying the, well, we haven't approved it yet, but it doesn't seem to me that there's any objection. If we're a potential that there was going to be denied, that we might have to find a different way. I appreciate your concerns, though. Commissioner Wolf?
I don't have it in front of me here, but I'll move to approve the request for extension of the special use permit for what is
2040 Merritt Road?
2040 Merritt Road to construct 3 new buildings, including a 7,000 square foot medical marijuana provisioning center, 4-story, 107-room hotel, and 8,690 square foot retail strip center. Is that sufficient?
Thank you. We're going to postpone that up into 6 more months.
To extend it for 6 months until
July.
It would be August 13th, I believe. It says our previous extension was through February 13th, so it would be March, April, May, June, July, August 13th, 2021.
Is there a second?
Wagner will second that motion.
Thank you. That's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Wagner to extend the deadline for building permit on this project until August 2021. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I think we can again handle this with a roll call vote. All those in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you each for your attention to detail as well. That will move us on to item 9.1, our work session for this evening, the review of the public comments and action items on the Shaping the Avenue effort. I want to start this discussion this evening by thanking those individuals who took the time to submit questions and comments, provided some really thoughtful ideas that need to be considered. And as I'd mentioned at our last meeting, even having seen this for a couple of years now, there are still some things that are puzzling. And so this opened up a number of other different questions that I think we should, be thankful that we're looking at them now rather than when this finally gets enacted. That said, I particularly appreciate Ms. Schmidt's taking the time to sort through the several comments from, it looked like primarily developers, landlords, property owners, and a group of architects, and sort of tabulating those or organizing those and trying to provide a sort of different degrees of difficulty by which they might be addressed. That was part of our memo this evening. So if there are no objections, and if Ms. Schmidt, you don't have anything to add, I would suggest we start at the top of your list and work our way through. Vice Chair Boyle. Sorry, Ms. Schmidt, Vice Chair Boyle was asking for the floor.
You're not on, you're muted.
Before we get started, I guess I have a question about the role of the Planning Commission regarding the form-based code. And in light of the extensive comments we just heard from Ms. Drager, I mean, I'm not sure we're in a position or have the resources to judge the economic impact of having a form-based code for this part of the city. And just sort of thinking about this here, sitting here, the meeting today, if we were to not recommend a form-based code, then council would have nothing to review. And I guess I had envisioned our role regarding this was to come up with what we felt was the best form-based code, which would serve the city of East Lansing, that we could then forward to city council, who then would be the ones to weigh some of the issues raised by Ms. Drager. So, I mean, including even the issue of whether it would discourage people from redeveloping. I mean, if we were to decide as a planning commission that a form-based code will have the impact that many people felt it did in the East Village and discourage redevelopment of obsolete or semi-obsolete property, then we send nothing to city council. I really don't think that was the intention in entering into this examination of the possibility of having a form-based code. So I guess my question is, possibly for the chair and Ms. Schmidt, what is the commission's role regarding this proposal?
Well, I guess I'll start, if that's okay. I'm just flipping through the list of 6 items that Dr. Drager had presented, and some of them are most certainly the sort of things that I would expect council is either aware of or would want to be aware of before proceeding, particularly the questions about, is there some sort of economic analysis done? Will there be one done? What is being produced, what MEDC wants to see? It's probably more of a question for staff and or council. I'm personally not aware of, sort of examples of cities where this has been done in, sort of except for with a blank slate. But I suspect that planning staff, if they don't know of, they could certainly look and find those things. So I guess I'm of a similar mind to you in that, we are going to give our best, or we have been giving our best effort to producing something that we think fits with the comprehensive plan as it's been written, and with the I guess the charge that's been offered to us by council through MEDC, that but I don't kid myself into think that we're clearly we're effectively just at the beginning of the public comment portion of this effort, and that we're going to see, I think, a lot more questions, and whether or not those are things we can answer or whether something that's more suitable for staff or council remains to be seen. It's a fair point that you're bringing up. Again, I'm sort of looking through this list of 6 questions, and I'm thinking you're probably right. I don't know that we can tackle most of them tonight, but they're things that probably should be given some consideration. Ms. Schmidt?
And
Mr.
I agree with everything you both have said. We're really, even though we've been working on this for quite some time, we're really at the middle of developing this plan, and having the wonderful input we've had, especially in this last batch of input, really will help the Planning Commission decide where to change the code. The code really isn't in any form to submit to MEDC at this point, or to submit to City Council, and that's what you're working on now. So as you said, this will continue to go through a lot more changes and public input. And at the end, Planning Commission will be sending it to City Council, and they will determine whether it will go forward or not.
Commissioner Wolf, I saw your hand.
Yeah, 2 comments, I think. First, I see this as primarily, let's say, implementing our master plan that we adopted 2 years ago. That called for us to develop a form-based code for the city. And so this is the beginning of that process, and we're certainly trying for the best form-based code that we can. And I agree that there are parts of it that City Council will be the ones to judge ultimately, and perhaps they're beyond our purview. In most cases, when developments come up, we do not really, in the Planning Commission, address economic issues. So I think that's consistent with this. And the second point, I don't really see any possible parallels between this and the East Village. The East Village code was developed, I'm pretty sure, with the knowledge that there was a single developer who was interested in buying that entire property, and actually came forward with a grand master plan for redeveloping the entire area. So that defined some of the characteristics of that code. Even though it was a form-based code, it was tailored to that particular purpose. The form-based code that we're doing now was not developed in that way at all. It was designed for our main, that's why it was shaping the avenue. So I am not at all concerned about this turning out the same way as East Village.
I think you raise a fair point. Actually, that question, as you read in the packet, there were a fair number of questions that tried to draw parallels between the two. And maybe they're not unfair parallels entirely, but that it is most decidedly a different way of handling any of the properties that are located in this proposed district, as opposed to, as you say, when East Village was originally envisioned, it was a comprehensive way of handling that very large piece of the city. That I think you've mentioned this to me before, and so I make a point when I remember to bring it up whenever possible, that this is really the city, through the Planning Commission or through the planning staff, attempt at addressing some of the goals that were laid out in the comprehensive plan. That it was something that was worked on, as we all know, over several years, and with a great deal of public input, and that this is the next step in implementing the a portion of the comprehensive plan as directed, again, by those people that ultimately had a hand in creating it. That said, does that sort of get us on a better place now, Vice Chair? Your question is well put, I think, and I think we'll probably see it play out. It's sort of maybe a clearer answer, or maybe a couple of the questions that were raised will be clarified by this commission, but I think a fair number of them are probably, again, either staff or council. All right. That said, Schmidt, I'll go back to you again. You presumably had something you wanted to say before we get things rolling on this, our last item of business for the evening.
I think I'm ready. I just wanted, I did want to let everyone know that there were probably about 4 or 5 letters that came in after the packet went out on Friday, even though they've been included in the packet. I have not had a chance to put them into the memo. So before the next meeting, those will be added to this list, and we'll continue to work off the same list.
Right, and I would concur with that. I responded to a couple of questions that were, or actually I responded with further questions for a couple of memos that I received today. So again, we're, in as much as we're into this a good deal, I don't expect that the conversation's likely to stop anytime soon. All right, then let's move on to the first block of topics that Ms. Schmidt has outlined for us. The first bullet point under topics that may require less discussion prior to a vote of the Planning Commission to add or modify the code. The first being clarifying the Commission's preference to minimize the boundaries of the avenue to generally follow the DDA boundaries. That is to say, those areas that are referred to as the mixed use frontages as opposed to the residential frontages. Those of you that have a copy of the, I presume that if it's not at your fingertips, you can find it relatively easily. The maps of the Avenue Forum District, and essentially this is the area as Ms. Schmidt has summarized, by and large follows the boundaries of the DDA. If you're taking a look at the map, it's those areas that are reds and dark oranges as opposed to lighter oranges and yellows that reach back up above, say, Albert Avenue and all the way up to Linden in some cases. Thoughts? Ms. Schmidt.
One of the things too, we didn't provide a map of a recommendation, but I think your comment about the colors using the red and orange and some of the deeper oranges, staff can provide a map for the next meeting showing what we recommend, and so that the Planning Commission isn't making a blind decision tonight. But Michigan Avenue, portions of Michigan Avenue should also be thought to be included in this as well.
Sure. Excuse me. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. If you've got the November 17th, 2020 draft, probably, yeah, the best map is on page 10, the map at the top that shows the entire Avenue Forum District, but doesn't include the overlays with the historic district. So it's about as clear as possible. At this point, I'm quite comfortable with the idea of discussing, is this something that we want to actually include both the mixed use and the residential frontages, or are we more comfortable at this point simply recommending the adoption of the mixed use frontages? Again, at this point, it's really just a matter of discussion, but I think that's probably wisely the first thing that we should talk about, because it will have a significant effect on whether or not any number of the issues that follow actually are going to be implemented. If I may, go ahead, Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, my question was going to be exactly that, and I'm still not sure. What is the decision whether to include only the M properties? Is it specifically that proposal and leave out all of the Rs?
Generally, yes. I think that would be the question, to do all the mixed use and eliminate the residential for now.
I will add that, this, again, I think I'd mentioned at our last meeting that this had come up in committee discussion periodically. And it was my personal feeling, I don't know that the committee ever actually sort of reached a specific consensus on this, but that we're talking about a significant undertaking in terms of the way that we think about zoning wherever, right? That this form-based way of thinking about zoning is a different way of thinking about zoning, and that if there's any concern about staff being overwhelmed, we would be better off, I think, to dial back our initial effort. And if we find that indeed it works as well as we hope, as smoothly as we hope, if it can be administered as seamlessly as we hope, it wouldn't be that difficult, to my way of thinking, to introduce the residential portion at a later date, even if it's within the next year or so. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, I'll certainly confirm that we did talk about it in the committee several times. And I'm also concerned about making the drastic change. I think I may have been the one who was most interested in doing the entire plan at once. In a certain sense, I will be disappointed if we can't do it all at once. It is all designed as one plan that is supposed to all fit together. And the different zones are up against each other for reasons, and we're expanding in a way that's consistent with the master plan. I have a feeling that the council is going to have some probably strong opinions one way or the other about it as well. At the moment, I could go either way on it. I guess I'm currently leaning towards thinking it is probably wiser to stick with just the mixed use implementation to start with.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, just a question on process. So hypothetically, if we were to narrow it and then add in residential later on, would that restart the entire process, or would it simply just be amending this plan to expand it? I guess I'm just trying to envision what that would look like, because that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yes, it would be amending this plan to add the residential back in.
But it does raise the concern, sorry, Commissioner Sullivan, if you were going to add something else, that, as Ed mentioned, there's a number of issues that have been raised that specifically have to do with properties that are located within the residential frontages. And that if we choose to set those aside and don't address those immediately, that bringing them on board at a later date would be more difficult, because we wouldn't have addressed something that needs to be addressed. So I don't know that the process would start over necessarily, but we'd have more work in front of us as opposed to taking care of it all initially and then rolling it out as sort of bit by bit with a little bit more ease, because we'd already addressed the somewhat difficult issues.
And if the intent is to have a more cohesive looking avenue, scaling it back could have the impact of a more patchwork looking area.
Sure. Commissioner Wolf?
It is going to create extra work right at the beginning as well to edit the document. I have a feeling it's not going to be as simple as just removing the pages where the R zones are listed. We're going to have to try to make sure there are no remaining references to them kind of left hanging.
Yep. One thing in particular, but go ahead.
And then eventually add all those back in the places that they are needed.
Sure. One in particular that comes to mind to me that, as I was thinking about this particular issue, is the introduction of the neighborhood manners, which currently would only be in place, be enforced, or be in place at those places where the Avenue Form District abuts a residential district. Well, if the Avenue Form District changes its boundary, the application of those neighborhood manners would change, right? The edge at which the neighborhood manners would be in effect would be altered. And then if at some later date we choose to reintroduce, or we recommend the reintroduction of the residential portion, that edge will change again, and it might very well be that the neighborhood manners would have been introduced in an area that is no longer, but that no longer is affected by them. That is to say, right now, if for instance, if the neighborhood manners were introduced, say for instance at Albert Street, and then the boundary is moved north to Linden, any neighborhood manners that were put in place at Albert were effectively would essentially constitute an additional, not hardship, but an additional constraint that wouldn't have been put in place if we had put all or both portions, residential and mixed use, in place at the beginning. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, just to put that another way, if we implement only the mixed use right now, it means that the neighborhood manners will affect many, many more of the mixed use properties. There will be far more mixed use properties abutting our currently zoned residential neighborhoods in Bailey. And so they will have to restrict their heights or their setbacks from those residential properties more than they would if those were also rezoned to the form district. Because the neighborhood manners does not apply when a mixed use, it doesn't apply within the form district, only at boundaries. So the neighborhood manners would have more impact than was really intended.
Exactly. Thank you. Other thoughts about that, Commissioner Williams?
As I think about this issue, and as I think about our conversations in committee about this, it seems that the document as it stands is most appropriate as is. We were, I think, thinking more about a political calculation of how to build support in the community for this approach to zoning. And as I think about it now, especially hearing the comments of both you and Commissioner Wolf again, I think that political calculation more appropriately rests with council, not with the Planning Commission. We were tasked with looking over a document and in the context of our master plan and bringing back to them a recommendation. And if rolling it out to the community and building support in their mind seems to be best in a two-step process, I think that's up to them. I would prefer, I think at this point, to leave it as is.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Sullivan, I want to just chime in that hearing from both of the two of you, my initial thinking about this is now swayed back to more in line with what, maybe I was the one that brought it up in the committee and the two of you were too polite to tell me that I was wrong, which is fair.
My mind slightly, but
I'm actually swayed by your by the discussion. It will be more difficult to, I mean, it's not our position to sell it, to explain it and to describe it to more people, because more people will be impacted. But I think you're right, that the sort of the high intensity stepping down through low intensity down to very low intensity will significantly change if the residential component is removed. Sorry, Commissioner Sullivan, please proceed.
No worries. Good point. I think Commissioner Williams made a fantastic point. I just keep going back to, and I know it's not an apples to apples comparison, but the legislative process. So typically you introduce a bill and it's got a lot of stuff in it. It's kind of broader, more comprehensive. And then as the process goes on, you strip it down and you figure out what really works. And I think if we're to send this to council in a scaled back version, that they're going to have a difficult time potentially expanding it. And, you know, we're the ones that have really been working on this a lot longer and have been more involved in it. So I think we should send them kind of the complete plan and let them make that decision. I think that's the right call.
Other thoughts? All right. If there are no other, we can always come back to this, but I don't see any need to dwell on it any further. But let's move on to item bullet point number 2. Evaluate the definitions that were taken out of the code to see if any should be added back to the code. Correct lettering style where needed for words that are defined. I'll start out by saying that I do recall removing a number of terms. And as I went through your list, Ms. Schmidt, there were a couple I couldn't remember why we thought we should remove them. So I'm looking for the list right now. It's on page 22 of this evening's packet. The first one is civic buildings. And again, if I can recall why we thought we should remove them, I will. The next one in particular, I think I had some thoughts about it, but is there any reason why, or Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Wolf, or anybody is there any reason why civic buildings should be omitted from our list of defined terms? Commissioner Wolf, thank you. I knew you'd have at least some insight. Thank you.
Oh, not really. I looked at the set of definitions in our November draft, and civic buildings is there.
Oh.
So
I can call that up too. Ms. Schmidt.
I can answer that. When we came, Dave and I actually removed that one, and the reason that we removed that one is because civic buildings, the way it's defined there is contradictory to how we have it listed in our chart and how we have it listed in our allowed uses. Because as the group added things to the spreadsheet, it no longer made sense. It contradicted what we added.
So are you saying, Commissioner Wolf, please?
But it is still in the definitions. It hasn't been removed. It's on it's on page 62.
Oh, civic buildings, I'm sorry. Civic buildings is correct. We added that to make the definition, but civic use we removed is what I meant. I'm sorry, I added that accidentally.
So the first item that we're supposed to be talking about should say civic uses?
No, there's another one down lower, I think. Yeah, it should say civic uses, but I have to look to see if I added the right definition. So we'll come back to that one.
Okay, yeah, use civic occurs further along on our list.
Yeah, and that's the one that wasn't, yeah, that's the one that needs to be looked at for removal.
That was removed as far as I can see from the draft I'm looking at.
Right, but we need to see if it needs to be added back in. That makes sense?
So because it's so the question is whether civic use, which we'll see in about 5 or 6 terms from now, that's your question, is should that be reintroduced?
Right.
Yes. Okay. So I guess we're all in agreement that civic buildings, because it's our current definition, should remain.
Should remain.
Okay. Then I'm sorry, Commissioner Williams. I can see everybody. We don't have a document in front of me. I just was looking away. Please.
Maybe my memory is failing me, but I actually don't remember removing these. Was this something that was a staff removal?
The civic use was.
No, I don't mean just specifically that one. I mean really all of them. I don't remember removing these.
Yeah, most of these were removed because they were duplicates, and the that they were self-explanatory or duplicates. They were explained in the document, and that's why they were removed.
So that sounds like a good reason to remove them. I'm not sure. Then I know why we'd want to put them back. I'm assuming you have a good reason for removing them. So what exactly are we considering?
There were several terms that where a couple planning commissioners thought that they should be added back in. Because the reason they realized they were up there is because the terms were, yes, this is a planning commission driven to add them back in.
That was because they were still in the document.
No, they were out of the document, but they were highlighted as if they were defined in the document, and that's how it was discovered they were taken out.
Okay, I'm with you.
So some detail-oriented members of this commission went through.
No,
Yeah,
I remember that part. But
I was not one.
I think it was more of a question of form as opposed to substance, as in this document is in all caps, but it's not back there.
Right.
So, okay. Now the question is do we need these really, right?
Commissioner Wolf, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I do remember us moving or removing several of these. And as we go through, I can comment on those as to what I remember. But I also wanted to say, I did not have time to search through the current draft and see if any of these are actually still used. And I think that's a very important thing to know. If they are used, if they're not used in that form, then we certainly don't need them. But if they are, we need to look at it and decide whether it's a common enough phrase we don't have to define it, or if we do need to define it and put it in small caps and so forth. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do all of that sitting here tonight, but as we go through, I can comment on some of them.
Okay.
All right. Oop, Commissioner Cahill, excuse me.
I would assume staff can do a word search on the original draft.
Right, we can too, but I just didn't have time to do it, so.
Okay. I don't know how to do it.
On that note, shall we move on to the, definition number 2 or item number 2, garden wall? Yes, thank you, Commissioner Wolf. This was one that I seem to recall as well.
Did you want to speak? Basically, I was going to say, I remember removing this and we found that it was not used in the document is what I recall. It was in the definitions and we couldn't find it anywhere in the document. I did not search it again to make sure of that, but.
Yeah, that's my recollection, is that probably at one point in an earlier version or in another municipality's version of this, they had walls rather than fences at the property line. And so basically, because we're not really using it, it probably doesn't belong in definitions and it shouldn't be in small caps. It presumably isn't actually in small, or it was. Vice Chair Boyle, you were the one that did the digging, if I'm not mistaken. Was this one that perhaps was found? Was found in small caps?
No,
Oh,
I
okay.
did for the digging. I think I raised the issue that there were some things that were capitalized that didn't have definitions, and I had a few of them, but I think Mr. Haywood found a long list of them, much longer than the ones that I found with my cursory inspection, so.
Thank you. And I'll just move on. If please do stop me. I don't want to clip through these if they require additional discussion, nor do I want to dwell on them if they don't. Stoop. Commissioner Wolf.
I just did a quick search of the document and it is used multiple times. It's kind of a, I don't know, if you look at the definition, it's not much of a definition. I think it's a reasonably well-known term, so either way would work, I think. But it is in small caps in the document right now in multiple places.
I think that this is one of those examples where it seems to me that it's pretty straightforward, or it's in common enough use that there shouldn't be any question about what its meaning is. Other thoughts? All right, then. Commissioner Cahill.
There is a reference to see individual building form standards for specifications.
Yep,
that
it's in the,
Seemed to be helpful information.
it's in the residential portion on page 31 of the November 17th document. It's in the table under elements. And it actually, in that case, it defines the sort of the difference between the, not the sort of, the difference between the stoop and the front porch. And that's really the key here, that presumably that information could be pulled out in that definition, but that it defines it in this particular location where you would presumably look for it anyway. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, if we were going to add this definition back in, I would take that parenthetical sentence out of there. The one that says, see the individual building form standards for specifications, because you could add that to almost any of the definitions in here. There are specifications for many, many of these things in the code. That's the purpose of the code, so.
Other thoughts about stoop? I don't know. I guess my thinking is that will get removed. If I don't know if you want to do this, I don't want to vote on these individually. Are you taking notes as to how? I mean, I've got it crossed out on my notes right now. How would you like to handle our recommendations for each of these items?
Does anyone have any objections? Might be a
There we
way to.
go. Thank you. Vice Chair Boyle.
Well, front porch is defined. So, I mean, it seems to me we either have both front porch and stoop in or neither in the definitions.
Commissioner Wolf.
I agree. And it would also be easier to add it in. It already exists in small caps in the document, so we don't have to go find all of them and change them.
Okay. But at the same side, Commissioner Cahill, let's remove the parenthetical. Commissioner Cahill.
Balconies also defined.
All right, excellent points. So maybe it does stay.
And my feeling would be that either they're all in or they're all out.
Yep, makes sense. All right, then I storefront. I'm presuming this is one that's in common enough use that it need not be defined, but I thought that about stoop, and here we are. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, we do have an issue with this word, which is that it sort of has two uses in the code. One of them is for what we call the storefront frontage, which is sort of a which think an overlay, I guess, on this, or a sub zoning. Well, actually, it's overlaid because it can be on M4s and M3s and yet it is also used in the more general sense of this definition. So it gets a little confusing. If you search the document, you find it both in small caps and in just a regular font. I don't know. It almost seems like this is one we have to look at more carefully and try to figure out. It's not consistent. For example, there's a usage here. Only commercial uses may occupy the ground floor of buildings located in storefront frontages. Now that is referring to the overlay, let's call it, the specifically defined overlay. And yet it's not written in small caps. There are other uses where it does appear in small caps. In fact, just on the same page, it refers to a mixed use site with a storefront in small caps, which I think it means, I think it's referring to a storefront frontage. So I don't think we can decide this one. So someone has to go through and find the uses and try to figure out what they are actually trying to say, I think.
All right, I'll make a note, further review. Any other thoughts about storefront? Vice Chair Boyle.
Yeah, I'm wondering if what this definition zeroes in on is that it's a portion of the facade of the building. And we're going to have certain requirements for that. So it would be storefront facade that.
Right. Yes, not the frontage.
Yes, but not the frontage.
Yes, I think that's exactly what we need to find out by looking through the document is what the usages are.
Just a quick note. Okay. Other thoughts about storefront? All right, story. Commissioner Wolf.
This is one that I remember us removing, and it's because this is a different definition of story than we have in our existing code. It's in conflict with it, actually. And I, at one point, raised the question of whether we were intending to stick with our current definition of story. And the answer from staff was that yes, we were. And that was why this was removed. Now, the fact that it's on this list, I don't know if this means that Mr. Haywood found it in the code in small caps.
Yeah,
perhaps.
Yes.
I'm looking at one right now. It's actually in the tables. It's in the height table for both of the mixed use and residential frontages. It's in the height table, as you would imagine.
Right. So I don't know if it's clear enough that if a word or phrase is used and it does not appear in small caps, then it may have a definition in the remainder of our code, and someone needs to find that definition there. Is that seems a little chancy.
Yeah.
In other words, do we need to copy the definition from the existing code?
We'll take a look at that and give you an analysis on the next meeting that we have, because I believe there's language in there that says that these are specific to, these terms are ones that are specific to the form-based code. However, but if they're not, we'll add that language.
Vice Chair Boyle.
Well, just that if we are in fact using the same definition that is in the rest of the code for story, then why wouldn't we put that definition in among the other definitions? That would just seem to make sense to me.
Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, Ms. Schmidt is right. At the beginning of part 9, it starts out, the following terms are defined for the purpose of this code. Terms not defined here may be defined elsewhere in the zoning ordinance. In such case, the definitions contained in the zoning ordinance shall be used. So the statement is there.
Okay. Down to the next item, street space. And then parenthetically, public realm. Part 5. Commissioner Wolf?
I'm kind of baffled by this. I think this is a pretty important one. I'm not quite sure why it's not there. In fact, if you look, public realm is there. I just lost it. And public realm is defined as all space identified as street space and also including parks. So it's defined in terms of street space. So I'm pretty sure we need that one. And even looking at the definition, I think that's a pretty critical one.
Okay. That one will be retained if there are no objections.
Oh, although the parenthetical phrase public realm,
Correct.
within it should be removed. That was one of the things we talked about in committee, that it got confusing as to the difference between the two.
Right, because that is a separate definition, correct?
Right.
No, and in fact, maybe if you take a look at page 35, it sort of has the public realm. I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of defined by the end of two, sort of between two marks that are shown by arrowheads. Whereas I think that's the public realm you can see on page 35. The street space actually encompasses everything from required building line on one side of the street to the other required building line on the other side of the street. Commissioner Cahill, while Commissioner Wolf is thinking.
Yeah.
Wondering why garage entries or common drives was excluded from this definition. I'm trying to think what makes them special compared to the road or the walkways, and I suppose in some instances the entry includes the sidewalk in most instances.
I don't know, Commissioner Wolf?
Well, I can think of one reason is that in portions of the code, we use the term visible from the street space. And there's certain things that are required when they are visible from the street space. And we don't want to include portions of a building that you can only see when you are in a driveway or an alley. I'm sorry. That should say alley there. That term common drive, Ms. Schmidt, or the others of you on the committee, that was
Yes,
that's correct. Yes.
We changed that in the definition from common drive to alley.
Yeah, so that means alleys. And so was that clear enough? For the things visible from the street space, it would not include things that are visible from an alley or a drive, a garage entry. I do. Sorry. Now that Chair Bowman pointed out that diagram on page 35, it seems like it's in error, or else the definition, because the street space is defined as being between fronting required building lines, but then the definition of the public realm is everything within the street space plus areas defined as parks.
Oh, wow.
So that
All
is
right.
showing the public realm as being smaller than the street space in that diagram, right? It's not going all the way to
Well-
the required building line.
That's all right. So I agree with you that I guess in some ways that was my thinking, that the street space was, well, as it says here, front, space between fronting required building lines. But you're right that the way that the diagram indicates what constitutes the public realm doesn't match up with the definition.
That's why we
Vice Chair? Then
It's
I'll
the
get you, Commissioner
diagram.
Cahill.
It's the diagram that's in error though, right?
Yeah, I believe
I
so.
think so.
Because
Yes.
it looks like sidewalk sales. You have all these tables or whatever in front of the required building line, in front of the buildings, and they are excluded from the public realm in the diagram. And I'm not sure why.
Those, because they wouldn't presumably be part of the, you wouldn't put it on the public street, you'd put it in the, well, in the dooryard, I guess, that
Right.
exactly as it's shown. Commissioner Wolf? Yes,
Yeah,
please.
Correct.
but now that we're talking about it, why would we call the dooryard the public realm? Because it is private property, right?
It's private property, it's correct.
So,
Oh,
so
you-
the diagram looks correct in that sense. Now I'm wondering if we have the definition wrong. I do understand why the street space would go up to the building, perhaps. I think that definition has a different purpose to some extent. But the dooryard is not fully public, I don't think.
Correct. It's behind the right of way. So I guess despite what I just said a moment ago, apparently then the definition is incorrect and the diagram is correct. Vice Chair Boyle?
So is the street space between the right of way? The building right of way?
It goes from building front to building to building front. If you're taking a look at the diagram, let me get the exact, it goes from required building line to required building line. As I read it.
That's right. And actually technically that is not necessarily where the actual physical fronts of the buildings would be in all cases. They have some leeway in placing them.
So the street space is from the required building line to the required building line. And the public realm is narrower?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how they did this. I'm looking back at the original draft from the consultants, and it is the same way. The definitions are as we're seeing them, and the diagram is the same. So the conflict between these was there originally.
Commissioner Cahill, finally, sorry, we'll come back to you.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's not, what I just told you is wrong. The original diagram that's now on page 35 does not have that, the words public realm and the arrows on it. That has been added. So I don't know if that was something we decided to add to it to clarify the diagram, but
get us all confused.
Didn't get the arrows quite in the right spot.
Commissioner Cahill.
Well, from what I'm hearing, street space and public realm are two different things. And we need two definitions and two lines on this. We need to add one for public, for street space there too, right?
As things stand right now, Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, public realm is already defined. It's in our definitions. It's defined as the street space plus parks. So it's defined in terms of the definition of street space. So it depends on having a definition of that. Which I guess is another reason we need the definition of street space in there. So I think the fix is to change the arrows in the diagram.
I think so too.
Now, unless we really think there's a problem with calling the dooryard, using the word public realm for it.
Ms. Schmidt.
So do we just delete that altogether, the public realm?
I think the
Delete what?
term and the leaders, the arrows and the term, I think probably would be, it would be clear to remove it from that, from the graphic. Commissioner Wolf.
Why would that be clearer?
Well, because because otherwise what you're going to have to do is extend those arrows from required building line to required building line so it encompasses the street space, and then have some additional note about it that it includes public greens or parks or whatever. What was the
Parks.
that by taking it off this entirely, you know, basically not making reference to the public realm on the graphic.
Oh, because it includes parks, and that wouldn't be obvious, you mean? Well, then,
Yes.
Then maybe it should say street space, because I think it helps to have the diagram. I think it adds a little bit to the definition if someone comes and looks at the diagram.
Sure. It's just that we'll change the term from public realm to street space, extend the head of the arrow to the required building line.
Right.
I mean, if it makes things even, I don't know if it'll help, but perhaps the definition immediately below that newly defined street space, leaders, headers, arrows, perhaps a note underneath that saying the public realm includes the street space plus public greens, or is that just, would it be better to just keep that in definitions? I have no thoughts. Commissioner Cahill.
It wouldn't seem that we need to use the term public realm since it's defined as street space. Space identified as street space. Seems redundant to me and confusing.
Commissioner Wolf.
But it's not. It's the street space plus any parks within the Avenue Form District. It is different.
Yeah, but couldn't you just add parks to the definition of street space and get rid of public realm then?
No, because they're not intended to be in the street space. And the terms are used in different places throughout the code. There's references to the street space that would be inappropriate to apply to a park, is the way I recall it.
Ms. Schmidt.
Maybe we don't need to have public realm on this because this whole diagram is referring back to the street space standards. So maybe removing public realm from this diagram and just having it in the definition is going to be easier, because I think this will be confusing for people when it's not necessary, because this diagram is referring to the street space standards.
Commissioner Wolf. Sorry, I'm just typing. Go ahead.
Yes, I agree with that, but I think it would be good to put street space in the diagram in place of public realm. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on then. I think we've resolved that. We'll come back to the civic use question, Ms. Schmidt. You're muted, Darcy. No worries.
Civic use, the commercial and the residential uses, none of them fit with what the code has been changed to or was to begin with. So when you read those, we removed that was, those three were removed by David and I.
And that's because right now we define civic uses as places of worship, governmental facilities, and schools only. We don't include the other things that are included in, say, civic use, but including what libraries, police and fire stations, post offices, and so on.
Right.
Is that why?
Why? Right.
Commissioner Wolf?
So are you saying we do need to add these back? Because I
No.
can't, okay, I agree that I think we took them out for a reason because they
Right.
did these next, all four of them.
Oh.
The civic, commerce, residential, and retail.
Correct.
If I read that correctly, does that also suggest that it says use / or use comma retail? Does that refer to the two items below it as well?
Correct.
So actually, the remainder of this page you're saying should be omitted from the definition. These definitions should stay out of the document.
Correct.
Commissioner Wolf?
But I think we do need to make sure that they don't appear in small caps in the document. Again, I'm wondering if that's why, if it was Mr. Haywood who flagged those as missing.
No, we had taken them out. I don't believe these were small capitals at all. We had taken them out when we were looking at the changes that we made, because we changed the use chart quite a bit and added definitions so that we could cover different types of office, different types of retail under one title. So this fit the chart prior to us making those changes, but it no longer fits them because we already have a different definition.
Does that move us to the next page then? Commissioner Cahill?
Are we taking civic use out of the definitions? Because it's in there right now. And it refers to use civic. Let's see, use civic.
Yep.
Civic buildings should be in, but not civic use.
It's, oops, there we go. That's correct then, Commissioner Cahill, that civic use / or comma C use civic should be removed.
The entire.
I think it, yep. All right, and then to the next page of Ms. Schmidt's document, or the definitions document. We're back. And we're back to street space twice. The street space frontage, I think I can address because we refer to, remember, we're not referring to zones anymore, we're referring to these as frontages. And I think that calling street space frontages was effectively redundant. All the frontages are gonna effectively face a street space. And so that was sort of a doubling up of a term. The frontages by definition will face a street space. That's my recollection as to why that one might have been omitted. That skipped ahead, sorry, it took the easy one. And street space, obviously getting rid of the parenthetical public realm so that those two are individually defined and not muddied up. But the way I see that written there, that's my understanding of the definition of street space. Commissioner Wolf?
Well, but we already talked about this one. This is a duplicate of what's on the previous page. It's the.
Oh, excuse me, it is.
The,
I was thinking that I'd flip the terms on. I was thinking that we had talked about public realm first. So indeed, it is correct. It just, we need to change the idea that the common drive should be referred to, actually refers to alleys. Thank you. All right. Any final comments about definitions? All right, then we'll go back to the main document, Ms. Schmidt's document. The next bullet point, I think some of these are going to be a little easier to handle. Clarify that flat roofs are acceptable. Materials should be updated to include modern flat roofing materials, such as single ply, built up elastomeric, PVC, et cetera, since they're not visible from the street. I think it's pretty clear that flat roofs are acceptable. It actually shows up, it specifically says so in the document under the frontage for mixed use, page 19, footnote 5. The very last sentence in that footnote says flat roofs are permitted. Indeed, though, under materials, they're not specifically defined, and you certainly wouldn't want to put a 3-tab shingle on a flat roof. I don't know how much effort we want to undertake to sort of list all those sort of materials, all the materials that might be used on a flat roof, though. That's page 45. Item C defines the materials that are appropriate for a roof. I'm of a mind to say that, Commissioner Wolf, please.
There is a reason that we might not need to do that. In section 604B, which is a couple pages earlier, maybe just one page, 44, applicability says the standards apply to any roof or parapet that is clearly visible from the street space, which a flat roof is not, right? The roofing material on it certainly wouldn't be visible. I don't know if that's enough reason to not include it. It would certainly simplify it.
Would. I actually think that, if I'm not mistaken, I think Matt Hagan raised this question as well. So I think both Tim and Matt raised this issue, but I think your point is well taken. Commissioner Boyle, was that your hand?
No.
The next bullet point, if there are no issues regarding flat roofs, consider adding aluminum doors to section 606. This is a Tim Rozowski item regarding what we would typically see in commercial storefronts would typically be fabricated of aluminum. I think we're calling specifically for steel as a permitted material. I'm not finding it though. Commissioner Williams.
Steel is listed specifically in 606 C2.
There it is. Thank you. Yep. Mr. Morozowski's concern here is that while steel is permitted and aluminum is not, I believe that he had said that steel is difficult to fabricate, difficult if not impossible, it's essentially unheard of to do a steel door with a thermal break, where aluminum doors might be done relatively easily in that manner. It just seems to me that omission is probably a vestige of the earlier intention to sort of sculpt the shape or the styles of these buildings to a more, an earlier era, say pre-World War II, and that it was just an omission, not in fact, more often than, well, not more often than not, but frequently the aluminum storefronts are colored so that you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that they were aluminum anyway. I think that seems like an acceptable addition. Thoughts? Commissioner Wolf?
Could we just say metal there instead? I'm wondering are there any metal options that we would not want someone to use?
Fair point.
Someone wants to go with a brass door or I don't know what.
Good point.
Are we asking for some kind of trouble by doing that? Or
I don't think so. No, I think that's a really good point. I mean, maybe there's some alloy that would be just fine that, we're certainly not going to list every metal that's potentially, could potentially be used. Oops.
I mean, as it's written now, it would actually allow a galvanized door, which some people might not care for, but I mean, galvanized is a steel.
Sure.
So that would certainly be a non-traditional sort of look. And why not allow any metal?
Any objections to changing aluminum to metal? All right. The next bullet, change section 606C1, page 49, from light transmission to transparent. 606C1. Go ahead, Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, I spent some time looking at this one today, and I think he is probably right about the numbers, but I think he's also wrong about the terminology. I'm not sure what he has in mind when he says transparent, but when I look up these terms, I find them, even in technical documents, to be pretty much interchangeable. But I mean, what it's talking about here is how much light the physical glass actually allows to go through from one side to the other, what percentage. And I went and looked at some other form-based codes that include this, and none of them have numbers as high as ours. I only looked at 3 of them, so it's not the universe of form-based codes, but they typically used a number of 60 or 70% for ground floor. And that's the higher of the two. And they typically had, they allowed 40% for upper floors. So I think he may well be correct that we are requiring too much light transmission. And I think maybe staff needs to look into this, or I'm not sure why the consultants put those numbers in, but they seem out of line with other code.
Yeah, so sorry. I thought I had the answer to this, and now it's escaping me.
So I'm pretty sure that changing the wording to transparency does not correct the problem, because I'm not sure what we would even be defining at that point. I don't know if he's mixing this up with the amount of clear area that we talk about in the storefront, because
No.
It's not talking about that.
No, you've got it right. That basically it's talking about windows that are, even if they're not tinted, they're sort of only let a certain percentage of the light in, right? That
It's
it
a
might be,
function of the kind of glass and the number of panes and
Yep. Or maybe some film or treatment that's applied to the glass. But I think his point here is that, oh goodness, what are they called again? Solar heat gain coefficient and visible light transmission.
right. When you try to meet the other standards, you do lose some of the light transmission, which is why it's impossible to meet that other standard and still reach 90% light transmission.
No, that's what he's saying, is that he couldn't find anything. This is his area of expertise, by the way. He was unable to find glass that met the energy code for solar heat gain coefficient requirements, but that also had a visible light transmission of more than 75% or more. And we're calling for up to 90% at the ground story. I mean, I think the intent here is that we be able to see through the glass, whether it's, whatever the percentage specified is less an issue than being able to see through it. And I don't know where the consultant got these numbers, but they do take the pain to say modification as necessary to meet applicable building and energy code requirements, which is what Tim is suggesting here. I think he's basically saying change both of them to 75%, and it shouldn't affect the way that you can see through the glass, but it could potentially reduce the amount of solar gain that would enter the building.
I thought he was saying even 75 was too high, that he couldn't even find anything.
I'll say I'm going by just his number here.
I don't have his exact words in front of me right now, but.
Oh. You're right. I basically just locked onto the number and presumed that he had found something like that. I think this is going to, maybe if I could suggest, because again, this is his area of expertise by far. Maybe this is a conversation with Tim in order to find out and it probably wouldn't hurt for us to find out, it certainly wouldn't hurt me to find out exactly what we're talking about in terms of transparency as opposed to sort of energy emission or energy transmission. Unless somebody's got some insight, I don't know that. I think that rather than trying to resolve it now, let's mark that down to something to have a conversation with Tim about and see what his thoughts are. I mean, the point I think is that we want to be able to see through the glass, whether the sun or the sun's energy, whatever radiant energy can get through the glass or not is immaterial, as long as light can pass through and you can see what's going on the other side. Commissioner Wolf, yep, your hand up.
Yeah, if it would help, I could forward either the excerpts of the codes that I found, or I suppose the entire documents where I found the 60 and 70 and the 40 for upper stories.
Sure.
So I was pretty heavily swayed by finding those lower numbers in these other form-based codes.
Sure. And again, it's not my thing the way it is his. Is it possible that those were they municipalities in Michigan?
Traverse City was one.
That's in Michigan.
I don't remember the other two.
I'm just wondering if if there's sort of Michigan had different requirements than, I don't know, Ohio or Tennessee. All right, then if there are no other objections to that, let's move on to this next item. Tim and I had spoken about this briefly. Clarify that air supply, exhaust, dryer vents, etc., are not prohibited from the street facade. He sits on the building board of appeals, and apparently, I think he said that when the hub was reviewed, they weren't the specifics are going to escape me, but they weren't permitted to have the sort of, I don't know, 5-inch by 5-inch square dryer vents facing the public right of way. And the way I see this particular portion of the code written, I'm not going to, maybe I can, it's under mechanical equipment. It's really talking about more the sort of rooftop units and sort of the large mechanical equipment that we're asking be screened from the public right of way, that it doesn't include small vents, doesn't include rooftop vents that you'd see, say, from a plumbing stack on your typical residential house. One of the examples that he'd offered is that I believe he said that the Landmark building has individual heating and cooling units. They're not in the windows; they sit immediately below the windows. But that the way that there's not so much a central heat plant in modern buildings so much anymore, and that the individual sort of heating and cooling, if it's supported by a larger plant somewhere centrally, it's supplemented within the building more locally. And again, I think he'd said, I seem to recall when we toured that building that the area immediately below the windows in the Landmark is actually an HVAC unit. And so clearly those vents are visible from the street. But you by and large wouldn't know it unless you, I don't know, I guess you could sort of see exhaust coming out of them, or on a really cold day, they looked like they were, putting out some sort of vapor. So his concern is just that wasn't, the intention wasn't that those smaller individual vents be prohibited, but that really my recollection was that the intention was that larger HVAC units, air compressors, mechanical pumps, exterior water heaters, and so on, the list is on page 51, that those things not be visible from the public right of way. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, the ones on the landmark, I have noticed them in the past, but they almost look like a decorative element there that's a little different than what's surrounding them. I really don't like it when mechanical equipment shows, so I'm a big supporter of this requirement. But I'm wondering if we can somehow, if we could say if it's things that somehow protrude from the surface of the building that are not allowed. Just a flat vent that is a grate, a type of a mesh or other sort of grate, does not seem like a big problem. And that's the kind of thing they have. I don't know what the hub wanted to do or was not allowed to or was required to do, but could we clarify this somehow, that certain kinds of vent openings are allowed, but you don't want to have a pipe sticking out below, from every apartment or.
Just by way of clarification, so as I read this, it wouldn't include the typical plumbing stack that comes through, the roof of everybody's house has one, presumably, or several, if you've got, remote plumbing fixtures. And that's what it lets air in so that the sinks can drain properly. But it goes through your roof, right? And it sticks up, 6 to 8 inches. And likewise, you've got, presumably on your roof, you've got roof vents that help keep the space beneath the roof and above the attic floor ventilated, or, so to let moisture out. So those, to my way of thinking, would not be included, but they do definitely project from the surface of the roof. Commissioner Wolf?
So which, are you looking at permitted roof elements or?
Well, right now I'm looking at page 51, mechanical. It's a 607D mechanical equipment.
Okay,
Shall not be stored or located within nor clearly visible from the street space, and shall be located and screened. Again, whenever I'd read this, I was thinking more rooftop HVAC units or the large sort of mechanical, I'll say industrial scale mechanical units, and not some of the smaller roof vents or plumbing stacks. Ms. Schmidt?
Staff can put together some language that might clarify it for you to look at and talk through. That might be easier than trying to figure it out on the fly. I know that even though our code suggests that talking more about rooftop, we do need to clarify that for the dryer vents and everything, just to make sure that it's clear.
Sure.
If it gets adopted, future administrators may look at it and not know, so we can add that language. So,
right. Again, I think his concern, sorry, Commissioner Wolf, I'll have to get the story from him specifically, but I think that he had said that during construction, the way that dryer vents and the hub were going to be vented was changed. It was going to be like a central stack that was going to vent each of the individual dryer vents and their lint that would have to be cleaned out frequently. And instead of doing a sort of a central stack, they chose to do something through the exterior wall, or use it's a special kind of dryer that doesn't do a particularly good job. And they were asked, or they were told by the Building Board of Appeals that they had to stick with their original plan. So I can get the specifics on that if you'd like, but I think his concern there was that, how specific were we going to get? how specific was this ordinance going to get, and making sure that that everyday vents and things that help our buildings run better weren't going to be an issue. When I was walking around this past week, the building on the northeast corner of Bailey and Grand River has a number of different, again, there may be 6 inches square, but louvered vents that face the street, and you wouldn't have noticed them until I just called them to your attention, I presume. And next time you go by there, they're all you're going to see. Commissioner Wolf, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I asked where you were in the code because I want to point out that this is covered in 2 different places. Items on the rooftop are covered on page 45 under D2, and it's pretty skimpy as to what it says. It pretty much says you can't put anything on the visible part of the roof other than a skylight, or a roof vent, which I think covers your plumbing stack, maybe certain other kinds of, I think of a bathroom exhaust fan, but on these buildings, you probably won't have those on the roof.
No.
So I think we need to possibly look at both of those 2 sections.
Yep, good point. Thank you. And thanks for it. As much as I've read this, I'd forgotten that there was a separate issue for potential roof elements.
Yeah, and it's not 100% clear whether the one you were looking at on page 51,
right?
It talks specifically about being behind and away from the required building line. It doesn't really say anything about roof mounted things, correct? I don't think it really restricts.
It does say nor clearly visible from the street space.
True. Yeah, that's true.
I'm just going over it again. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I guess something on the roof could certainly be clearly visible.
Again, I think it just goes back to intent, and I don't think that there was ever any, to my way of thinking, that sort of the smaller stuff. But if you don't call it out, that's another thing he's really good at is sort of thinking all sorts of what different issues might arise. That in my mind it was pretty cut and dry.
Just one last comment. I think we're finished, but you mentioned not to worry about the smaller stuff, and I'll just kind of repeat that I would still be strongly in favor of limiting the amount, the protuberances from the building. Even if they're small, having lots of those could be pretty counterproductive. So if we can find a way to keep them flush to the building.
Yeah, actually, I can see the difference between a grate or a louvered vent that sticks out a 1/2 inch and a pipe, or even a louvered vent that sticks out 6 inches, right? There's a significant difference in the way that is read. I agree with you that that's a pretty big difference in an expression on the face of the building. Next, Commissioner Cahill.
On the landmark, I had noticed those vents, and I remember coming home and getting out a file I have here that had some renderings that I still had from the project, because I was thinking, I don't remember seeing those in the presentation for this building, and I actually found them to be not very good looking. And I don't have a full rendering. Most of my renderings are of the other side on Albert Avenue, but I've got one that's got about 4 floors, and there were no vents shown on that rendering. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking back to the Abbott. I don't recall seeing vents there. I don't know if anyone knows if there are vents along Grand River. And certainly I'll check out the building that you mentioned, Dan, because I guess I hadn't noticed vents there.
But you will now.
Yeah. But I don't like the look of vents on the street side.
Right.
Enough so that, as I said, I came home actually to see if we had actually somehow approved that.
Sure. I'm mindful of the time. Maybe we can get to the end of this section, or maybe the next couple. We didn't really set a time limit, but I don't expect we're going to get through this entire list this evening. Shall we aim for 9 o'clock-ish and see where it leads us? All right. Excuse me. Clarify whether an existing house will be able to renovate or to add an addition to the now non-conforming property. I think this was a Matt Hagan question, though it doesn't matter who brought it up. I believe that's answered back in the early tables.
I thought we dealt with this pretty thoroughly in the table. If he thinks there's something missing, or maybe he didn't see that.
No, actually, Matt and I had a lengthy conversation about all the things on his list as well. There's the table. I'm going to see if I can't dig his notes out here so that I can find out if there was something that I'm forgetting. Go ahead, Commissioner Wolf.
No, I was just going to say, if he thinks there's something not covered here or not covered properly, if he could tell us what that is. We're talking about page
5. Yeah, so it's early.
5, I think.
Yeah. Actually, his notes start on page 7. Anyway, I believe during my conversation with Mike, I think I explained to him where we would find that, and then if it's considered a small expansion, that only certain items would be expected to be brought into compliance. That otherwise, if it were a big change, the entire building would be brought into compliance. That actually raises another issue that I don't want to bring it up right now. We'll bring it up at a later date. It was part of the communication that was, I believe that presumably that you received today, Ms. Schmidt, from Ms. Marr, having to do with some provisions of the code in East Village. I don't want to get into it tonight. We will get into it eventually. But that the question had to do with replacement after sort of catastrophic fire, tornado, or something like that. And there's a provision in the East Village Code that addresses that there might be a way, there should be a way that this code addresses that as well. So, Ms. Schmidt?
Yeah, it's the intent, and I'll look through the code and make sure that we don't need to add language that makes it more clear, but it's the intent that this will defer to the non-conforming clauses that are in the main code, which would cover that.
Right. I presumed that it would as well, but it was just, again, we'll talk about that, I think, in more depth at a later date, but I was less concerned. It's a good point to raise, but I was less concerned that was going to be an issue. Next item on our list, page 22, discusses how windows cannot be blocked by shelves or opaque material. He's asking that this be reconsidered since it's difficult for a business to do in the current economy with additional, restrictions put in place. Page 22 is the storefront frontage items requirements. And I'm not going to find it immediately, but this comes back to that, making sure that indeed all ground floor windows indeed are used as windows. He makes a point, and I think a fair one, of saying that currently the way that Target is currently set up, the CVS on MAC and Albert has got a similar situation all along its north wall. I can't remember my specific conversation with him, but that I expressed that that's not an ideal situation, that indeed we do see it, we have seen it, and that the intention is to avoid that in the future. I also explained to him that when put to it, the developer, the tenant, the 7-Eleven in the hub, was asked to go back and reconsider a similar proposal that they had, and they were able to find a way to rearrange their merchandise to keep the storefront open, but also get the displays that they wanted to. I think you recall that when that came up to us, was it a year and a half ago? It's been more than that probably by now. And I think they did a masterful job of sort of reconsidering, how the street and the interior of the buildings should relate to one another, and found a way to not obstruct the view in. So I think his objection is, is well noted. But I believe that is indeed the intent, that storefronts will be storefronts. Commissioner Wolf?
I'll try to keep this short, but I spent a bunch of time on this one this week also. And I would point out, first of all, that this applies only in the storefront frontages, which is only, depending on how you count, it's maybe a dozen blocks. I mean, not square blocks, but linear blocks of the downtown. There is actually an exception in this that he doesn't mention, and maybe people haven't noticed it, and that is that display windows are allowed. And I'll get to that in a moment. But then I'd like to encourage everybody who hasn't been down there recently to go down and look at the new Walgreens that's on the corner of Abbott, and it's in the ground floor of the Abbott student apartment building. And you don't have to go in it, just look at it from the corner and see how much better it looks than the CVS that is a few blocks away. And they were not required, I don't know exactly how this happened, but they meet our transparency requirement, and it's wonderful. You can see the inside of the store, you can see the activity of people inside it. There is an issue with some windows that are to the north end along Abbott, which we may need to learn a lesson from, but we can talk about those another time. But anyway, the corner with the visibility into the store is just great. And they managed to accomplish it without any problem. So the other thing I did was I walked along at least half, probably more than half of those 12 fronting blocks of the downtown, observing all the windows. And I would say probably as many, possibly as many as 90% of our existing stores meet this requirement already, at least 75%. And they do it in a variety of ways. Most of them just meet it plain and simple. They have windows, and the restaurants usually have tables up near the window. You can see people at the tables. You can see even beyond them. Many of the storefronts have the front window unobstructed. So I don't see how this could be considered a problem. And it's a whole variety of different kinds of businesses. They all manage to do this without impeding their ability to do business. Some of them where you can't see into, for example, Curious Books is one of them. They have display windows that's showing their merchandise, and they change it regularly.
They do.
Well, I don't know how often exactly, but the Mad Eagle on the corner of MAC and Ann Street has their clothing displayed in display windows. There's another, I can't remember if it's Clever Clover, or there's another clothing store that has a display window with clothing. Even student bookstore that he mentioned has a wall where right now they have a seasonal display filled with all sorts of knit caps to keep you warm. So I think maybe he overlooked that possibility. There are parts of student bookstores windows that do have shelving up against them, which could be a problem. So I'd also like to say, let's see, two more things. If you look at the actual code, if you look at page 22, I think we might need to clarify something. I guess I'm asking the committee and Ms. Schmidt. If you look at footnote 2 on page 22, the key thing is in the middle of that note. It says, with the exception of display windows, a minimum of 75%, et cetera, shall allow a view into the building for a depth of at least 15 feet. I think the next sentence could be a slight problem. It says, windows shall not be blocked with opaque materials or the back of shelving units or other fixtures. Now, I think we intended that to be part of the 75%, that you could indeed have opaque materials or shelving units or fixtures, as long as they don't block more than 25%. And if you don't read that carefully, it doesn't necessarily say that right now.
I agree that that's the intent, that basically you could take some liberties, say maybe raise the sill effectively with some sort of opaque film, right? But
Right.
that, maybe raise it a foot or two, as long as it doesn't cover more than 25% of the available window space.
Or
Commissioner
you could
Williams?
even have a tall shelving unit at some point, as long as the remaining linear footage was unobstructed.
Yes.
The way it's written, if you read just that sentence by itself, it sounds like an absolute prohibition, which
Right.
I don't think we meant.
I'll take a look at that and correct it, and I might send it your way, Commissioner Wolf, to take a look at it, see if I got it right.
Okay, and then just one last comment, that he pointed out that the Target and the CVS are already violating this. To me, that's just a non-issue. I don't know why he even brought it up. You could say that about any provision of this code. Any part of this new form-based code, you can find buildings that don't meet it. We know that. So I just can't see that as a reason to not do it.
All good points. Any other comments? Commissioner Cahill?
I think the transparency into the various businesses is important. If a business was going to put the back of a shelving unit up against the window, I'd rather see it bricked up than look at that.
Good point. Any other comments about, or questions, comments about, I'll call that storefront visibility. All right, that brings us to just past 9 o'clock. The next item for consideration has to do with overhangs and eaves, and then after that, the height overlay. And I'm sure we don't want to, I presume we don't want to delve into that tonight, but maybe we do. I'm quite happy to listen to to set it aside for now, since we're not going to tackle the rest of this evening. Any thoughts? We have plenty of business to do, so it's not as if we're cutting out in the middle of a agenda item. If there's a motion, I guess we've got a couple of other things on our agenda, but I saw Commissioner Wolf's hand.
Yeah, the height overlay.
Do you want to tackle that tonight?
Well, there's a complicated way to look at it, and there's also a simple way to look at it. His question was about the 160-foot overlay, right?
Yes.
That will, because of its wording, it will be essentially ineffective or null and void after this, because what it actually says is within this overlay district, a building may be constructed to 160 feet if the building would otherwise be eligible to be built to a maximum building height of 140 feet. Well, when we put this code into effect in place of B3, there will be no buildings allowed to be 140 feet. So the overlay, there will be no portion that meets the requirements of the overlay. So that's the simple answer.
Sure. Let's stick with that for the time being.
I guess I'll add on that the form-based, the Shaping the Avenue, the form-based code was written as an implementation of our master plan, which does not allow buildings up to 140 feet. The maximum is 120. Is that correct? I can't remember. When you add in the bonuses, what does it get you up to?
I'm scrolling.
Yeah.
10, so 10 stories total. Oh, goodness. 140 feet with bonus, according to the table.
Oh, it is 140.
That's what it says.
Oh, well, in that case, I'm wrong. I thought the total in there did not go up that high.
Yeah, now I'm doing math. Sorry.
We changed that, Commissioner Wolf, right towards the end to be in line with what the,
Oh,
So I can't imagine that you got that one wrong. That's a pretty key number. I'm reading off of what the ordinance says, but it seems like or what the table says. Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. I think probably the as strong point is that, this is this is an implementation of the comprehensive plan that specifically called for not lower necessarily heights, but certainly not quite as high maximum heights.
yeah. Now that Ms. Schmidt says that, I remember that this is one of the last changes the last tweaks we did to the numbers there. So forget everything I just said.
Oh, I think you're
The
right.
160 is still an issue then.
All right, so that brings us to about 10 after 9. We did skip the bit about eaves, but we can come back to that either now or at a later date. I'm not seeing anybody terribly eager to talk about building eaves as much as we might like to. We can save that one. We can start the meeting, our next meeting with that as a vigorous discussion about overhangs. I'm not seeing any objections, and so I'm going to move us on to item 10, commissioner concerns. If anyone is concerned that the meeting is ending too abruptly, we can go back to item 9. If not, and there are other concerns you would like to raise, now would be the time. I will let you all know that we have received an application for our current vacancy, and the Mayor Pro Tem, who is our liaison, has said, let's interview this person. And so that person may join us at our next meeting or in a meeting shortly thereafter that. Any other concerns? Well, if not, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
Cahill.
Oh, thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Cahill
Second.
and seconded by Commissioner Wolf. There is no discussion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed. Thank you. We are adjourned at 9:10. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
night.
Good
Nice to meet
night.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.